A Manifesto by Claire Tolman, Liz Rivera, Eliani Rodriguez, Lexi Upshaw, Isabella Tinucci-Tazi.
We are a collective that seeks to transform the systems that have historically marginalized the most resilient people. We seek liberation and joy for all people, especially those who are erased, terrorized, and criminalized by the structures in which we exist. We recognize our positions as proto-settlers on stolen and colonized Tequesta, Taino, Miccosukee, and Muskogee territory. We do not aim to erase the traumatic history of the origins of this nation-state. We acknowledge the inconceivable pain and suffering derived from the slaughter and genocide that occurred on these lands.
We come from backgrounds of marginalization, migration, and erasure, but we must recognize the privileges that have brought us to our manifesto. We acknowledge that we are in privileged positions to write our manifesto. We are cisgender, able-bodied women who attend a predominantly white and privatized institution. We are in an academic space that challenges us to reclaim our freedom and rewrite our destiny. We exist in a space that fosters community and security as we preach for the recognition of humanity in us all, something many activists have been terrorized for doing. We fight toward liberation to reclaim our freedom because although we have access to these pockets of privilege, we are not yet free. Our shared identity is rooted in the belief that none of us are free until we are all free.
Collective, we share a vision and multiple identities. However, it would be disgraceful if we did not embrace all the unique characteristics that each of us empowered women bring to this collective group. We are Black women, we are white women, we are Latina women, we are queer and straight women. We are women from all economic classes. We are graduate students from different disciplines. We are religious and atheist women, and we are women whose identities are international. We are survivors of the patriarchies and healers of our trauma. We are partners, lovers, friends, family members, colleagues, and peers. We are organizers who meet and critically engage with our identities and those not present in this group at the intersection of race, class, disability, gender, and sexuality. We are humans with beautiful differences that stretch across borders. We are activists that consolidate our differences into our strengths and vision for a society centered on love, compassion, and respect. And finally, we are students of the world. Our manifesto exists as a living, breathing document. Although it reflects our visions today, we embrace the ability to grow, learn from our mistakes, and adapt our vision to those around us.
We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. James Baldwin. We fight for women who are survivors of sexual assault and abuse, women who are shamed, and women who are not believed. We fight with women who don't have the power to make choices about their own bodies. Our comrades are those who society does not claim: the unhoused, the poor, the disabled, and the undocumented. We fight for Black transgender women who are murdered at a terrifying rate. We fight alongside people struggling with addiction and people who are thrust into the shackles of the criminal justice system. We stand together with those who America casts aside.
Our people are indigenous to the stolen land. Our people are impacted by environmental racism. Our people feel the earth and themselves dying under the weight of oppression and exploitation. We fight alongside those who don't have access to health care. We fight with the people who don't receive affirming education and are taught to be ashamed of the way they look, the way they love, and the person they are. We fight with single mothers, with parents of children who have been lost to gun violence, those who sit by the phone, fearful every day that their child will be harassed or shot by the police, those who must teach their child that the world will not be kind to them.
Our allies are the ones who want to transform the world, the social justice warriors and critical thinkers, those who lead with courage and seek liberation for the most marginalized. Those who recognize that we are only as free as the most oppressed person in every room. Those who see differences as beauty and strength. Our people are those who lead with love and curiosity, who commit to learning and unlearning. Our people acknowledge their privilege and their power and want to learn from their past mistakes. Our people listen to understand and preach the truth instead of hatred. Our people do not run from or deny our history, but instead examine it with clear eyes and motivation to build a better history for those who will come after us.
Dialogue focused on liberation and the abolition of our current structures must emphasize the collaboration between these systems of oppression. We as individuals, as a human race, cannot and will not ever fit neatly into one box or category, despite the systems that try to make this possible. These boxes, our multiple identities, are representative of our history, culture, and life, but also govern the way we are judged by the world. The structures we currently operate within were built by a certain identity: white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied men, for the success of that same identity, meaning anyone who differs is ultimately punished. Moreover, the farther one deviates from this identity, the harsher the system punishes them. As we accept the significance of interdependence and intersectionality that affects oppression, we, as a collective, vow to recognize the struggle and trauma that each of us has faced without comparison.
The systems our society has come to depend on for guidance are the same systems that are failing us as a collective. The paradox of oppression is seen all around us. Healthcare, education, transportation, and more create life-threatening conditions in direct contrast to their original purpose. The overlapping and intersecting systems, when working in unison, are used to punish those who diverged from the identity of the oppressor, that is, the white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied man. Individuals who bear multiple marginalized identities are not given access to life or the ability to enter a space with a guarantee that they will come out alive. As we delve into each system that we as a collective stand firmly opposed to, we must recognize the interdependency of these systems and the layered way in which they cause further pain and marginalization.
This patriarchal world, as we know it, thrives on the concept of binaries: right or wrong, black or white, man or woman. The perpetuation of heteronormative and cisgendered ways of being and loving are rigid and uncompromising. The absorption of these ideas into the culture as a whole has created norms that are oppressive to all folks, but especially those whose bodies go against the culture of white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied productivity. As a collection of women, our bodies live under constant threat. The seemingly monstrous system that is the patriarchy finds itself affecting many different parts of our lives. People with uteruses are unable to make decisions about their reproduction. Gender expression becomes policy over personal choice, and queer folks are often faced with choosing between their authentic selves and their safety. In some of the more extreme cases, we see the existence of sexual violence, the literal theft of a person's autonomy via an intimate and traumatic act. Patriarchy controls these models of being, as well as impacting the ways in which we interact with one another. Ethics of care, love, and compassion are feminized and seen as inferior to masculinity and violence. The very system of gender normativity prevents us from engaging with radical healing, as it is antithetical to the patriarchal project.
We refuse to accept and adopt patriarchal principles into our relationships and our perceptions of self. We stand with all those who have experienced gender-based and/or sexual violence, the queer youth who cannot return to abusive homes, and the folks who are disparaged for valuing care over competition. We believe in creating a liberated world where our bodies are our own and we are not subject to genitalia as a basis of judging capability, career, or worth. We want our children, grandchildren, and beyond to feel loved in their authenticity rather than hunted for opposing the patriarchal ways of being.
Our society was built both physically and metaphorically on the backs of individuals forced into oppressive positions. The economic system at work in our society is one that only functions at the expense of others. The nature of capitalism stems from an individualistic framework, putting an individual's needs, wants, and desires above the collective's. The concept of succeeding at the expense of others fuels the way in which our economy and society work.
When people were labeled as property and/or currency in our economic system, the system could no longer be seen or used without a racial lens. Capitalism was raised on the ideals of Black and brown people as currency, seen as less than human beings worthy of autonomy. This deep-rooted message is still reflected in the same capitalist economic structure we employ in our society today. Capitalism continues to generate exploitation and use the bodies of Black and brown individuals for financial gain. Individuals with marginalized identities are involuntarily forced into a rigid hierarchy in order to preserve the system. This system benefits few and deeply harms all others.
We believe in the abolition of capitalism and the destruction of our current economic structure. We trust in our creativity and lived experiences to help guide us when creating and building a new economic system that does not rely on oppression to function. We can no longer operate in a system that creates a hierarchy of people, placing more value on certain human lives than others. We vow to actively reframe our way of thinking, to silence our judgment of others, and learn to love our differences.
We have conversations of liberation and justice on stolen land. We glorify tales of these United States without any acknowledgement of the bodies we built this country atop of. Even in our education system, we teach the history of colonialism as a far-off notion of our past, rather than stepping into the truth of modern settler colonialism. Land continues to be at the core of colonialism. In the time of conquest and genocide, land was the object that led to the murder of thousands upon thousands of indigenous peoples. Today, the mechanisms of colonialism include more avenues for the control of bodies and minds. The imperialist thought that drives colonialism has evolved to control new forms in which we interact with land and with our minds, even as proto-settlers. The access to spaces and the privatization of land via corporations and conglomerates presents forms of social control that put lands in the hands of the elites. They create arbitrary borders, barbed wire fences, and layers of bureaucracy that serve to keep land from the people. This is a careful and deeply disturbing process that has led to gentrification, redlining, food deserts, dispossession, and borderlands. Without access to spaces for food, community, and collaboration, we find ourselves fighting for the liberation of the places we call home.
Our collective recognizes the past and present forms of settler colonialism that we form a part of. As American citizens, we see the hypocrisy in citizenship on lands that have never been ours to begin with. We believe in the repatriation of land back to the indigenous peoples of America, as well as the creation of public spaces for community building. We want to see land as places for radical healing, not only for the land itself, but for our bodies as well. We will work towards the occupying and taking back of spaces. We will stand with the indigenous struggle of repatriating land, and we will dismantle the colonial mindset that has seeped into our education and our histories.
Remaining steadfast in our mantra, we recognize that the systems we are interacting with deserve a multifaceted and layered approach for all people. Every human has a right to dignity. Our collective recognizes that acknowledgement is not enough. Intentional action is the only way. The systems that control our society and ways of life are all intertwined and are rooted in oppression. The interplay and intersection of these oppressive systems continue to impact our peoples individually, collectively, and generationally. Until these systems are dismantled, can we start to rebuild a new possible tomorrow?
Just as these systems do not exist in isolation, we cannot fight them in isolation. The power of community and interdependence is an important avenue through which we can enact and live social change. We demand repatriation of land to indigenous people and reparations to descendants of slavery in the way each population envisions it. We demand abolishment of borders, prisons, and police. We demand that every human being has free and equal access to housing, education, food, and clean water.
Seeking to engage in self-reflection, community building, and radical imagination as often as possible. We recognize our own growth in this journey and remain steadfast in disrupting any system that makes our people unfree. We are committed to learning and unlearning from our communities as we look to unify our strengths and vision to create a reimagined society rooted in acceptance, love, compassion, respect, and dignity for all beings.